prepaid collect call from
Levi Jonathan.
an incarcerated individual at Polk County South Jail. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. To accept charges and consent to this recorded call, press 1. To refuse charges, thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
All praise Jah King. I'd like to share about a dream that an ancient king of Babylon had. The interpretation of this dream by Daniel the prophet is being fulfilled today. First, the background of Daniel. Daniel was a child of Judah who was taken into captivity by Babylonians during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel was probably taken to Babylon when the Judean king Jehoiakim was taken captive. This assumption is reached because Jehoiakim is mentioned in the book of Daniel as being in his third year of reign when Nebuchadnezzar came to besiege Jerusalem. Daniel is mentioned in the book of Ezekiel 28:3 with reference to the city of Tyrus. This concludes that Jah works of Daniel were known at that time. Daniel would grow up in Babylon to see Nebuchadnezzar replaced by his son and see the kingdom conquered by the Persian rule. In fact, it was Daniel who read the writing on the wall that prophesied of this Persian conquest. Before this came about, Daniel had interpreted a dream Nebuchadnezzar had. Daniel not only interpreted the dream, he showed the king of Babylon what his dream was, because apparently Nebuchadnezzar had forgotten. The dream was about a statue. The head was gold, the upper body silver, the abdomen and thigh bronze, the rest of the legs iron, with feet made of iron and clay. These parts of the body represent kingdoms. The head of gold is Babylon, the silver Persia, the bronze Greece, the iron Rome. These would be the empires of the world, expanding their control to dominate those nations within their reach. Each kingdom would grow as the next came into power. One may ask why these empires are increasingly represented by inferior material if they became more powerful in time. Also, who is the fifth kingdom? Babylon is the head of these empires. It is the Babylonian rule that exists throughout the subsequent forces. To put it another way, the Babylonian way greatly influenced the next world powers. We can think about it like this. When Babylon was overcome by Persia, the Persians adopted the culture of the Babylonians. Although Persia was expanding to include the territory of the Babylonian Empire, the Persians were merely installing their own ruler while maintaining control over the populations and the land. Similarly, when Greece became the next empire, it developed into the Babylonian way. The most famous of Greek rulers, Alexander, is said to have died in Babylon. By the time Rome took over, the Babylonian system was the foundation of that civilization. This is why the Babylonian is the head. It is the brainchild of world powers. The fifth kingdom is the feet. The feet are the future. They lead the nations to where they are going. The kingdom is divided as it expands into new terrains. Each new nation wants sovereignty. They are part iron because in modern times it is the Roman law that becomes the bedrock of their democracy. The clay is the confusion. In this era, there is no real stability in how the populations of the superpowers are governed. It is not solid, shall mix but not cleave. They follow the same course, only in a different direction. A law that is interpreted one way is interpreted in another. Babylon is falling because it rests upon brittle bones. It is a self-defeating enterprise. They are all headed for destruction while they carve their own paths to get there. In the dream, there is a stone that breaks the feet into pieces. Ionite Kingdom is represented by Jah stone. It is cut out of Jah mountain without hands. It is a spiritual power. No kingdom could withstand the strength of Jah's spirit. Jah's spirit is the truth that sees through the lie, the force that breaks the bondage of Babylon, so that our people will no more depend on the construct of man. In the beginning was Jah Word. Jah Word was with God. Jah Word is God. What is Jah Word? Jah Word is pure. Jah Word is law. Jah's law is not made to be broken. When you give someone your word, you give them a promise. Not too long ago, a man was measured by the guarantee he would keep his word. And you shall know them by their fruit. But Jah's word is good. The first members of the church enter into a league to share all their wealth. This is documented in the book of Acts, chapter 2 and chapter 4. All that believed were together and had all things common. Neither was there any that lacked, for distribution was made unto every man according to his need. It was a socialist doctrine, an inclusive agreement. Members were bound to it with their lives. When nations enter treaty with one another, the idea is that they will honor a promise. Historically, wars have been the result of one nation not upholding its end of the agreement. It should be said, though, that sometimes the contracts are drafted with the inevitability that one party will fail, not by choice, yet by inability. The predator party then claims the right to swoop in and take possession of whatever treasure it sought to begin with. This is a capitalist doctrine. In a similar sense, the League of Nations was formed with an ulterior motive. The noble idea was that if any weaker nations were to be invaded by a powerful military, those nations who had joined themselves to the League would unite to protect the weaker nation. It was the pitch. In reality, the initial signatories of the pact sought to band together in the event that Germany went to war with them. Instead of gambling on who would have to defend itself, they said, we will protect each other. It was an exclusive agreement. This was in 1919, following World War I. In 1923, Rastafari secured a spot as a member to the League for Ethiopia. It was the logical thing to do. After all, Ethiopia was a kind of poster child for the cause, an underdeveloped nation threatened by colonial power. With the invasion of Ethiopia by Italy in the 1930s, the collective security the League formed itself around was discovered to be a farce. This was a test of man's word on an international scale. Man sought to save his own skin by selling out. With the onslaught of World War II, the League of Nations was abandoned. Emperor Haile Selassie pleaded with the League to come to the aid of the Ethiopian people once in 1936 and a second time in 1938. Here is some of what His Imperial Majesty had to say on the second occasion He called man out. The Ethiopian people, to whom all assistance was refused, are climbing along their path to Calvary. No humiliation has been spared to the victim of aggression. All the resources of procedure have been tried with a view of excluding Ethiopia from the League of Nations, as the aggressor demands. Thus, for 3 years, there has been before the world and before the League the problem of international order. Will law win the game against force, or force against law? Ethiopia, the victim of inexcusable aggression, has placed her confidence in the signature of state members of the League, although the support that was due to her was given only in a very incomplete measure. Since 1935, Ethiopia has, with pain, noted successive abandonments of signatures that had been appended to the covenant. Many powers threatened with aggression and feeling their weakness have abandoned Ethiopia. They have uttered the cry, panic en route, everyone for himself, in the vain hope of carrying favor with the aggressor. They have regarded themselves as freed from the undertakings they had assumed for general security. Thus, they have themselves overthrown all principles on their very existence rests. They have torn up the treaties that ensured their own independence, the treaties of non-aggression, the covenant of the League of Nations, the Pact of Paris. By what right will they themselves be able to call on these undertakings if they regard as scraps of paper treaties they have signed? Aggressions have taken place in increasing number. The contagion has been propagated. Certain states are now engaged in full struggle, others are threatened. Fear reigns over the world. The present or forthcoming victims tremble for the future, and they think they may improve their situation by flattering those whose aggression they dread. International morality has disappeared. The excuse of these weak people is their very weakness, the certainty that they would be abandoned as Ethiopia has been. And between two evils, they have chosen the one which fear of the aggressor leads them to consider the lesser. May God forgive them. Today, the council is being asked, in regard to Ethiopia, to recommend to members of the League of Nations to associate themselves in a measure calculated to weaken the powers of resistance of the Ethiopian people, thereby aggravating its difficulties and its conflict with Rome, and that they should examine individually the extent to which they assist the aggressor. As against these defaults and the proposals that are made, whatever the form they assume, I, legitimate Emperor of Ethiopia, address to all the nations of the world on behalf of my martyred people the most energetic protest. In order to eventuate the flagrant violation of the covenant, the suggestion made today to the Council invokes the de facto situation in Ethiopia at the present time. But if it were true, and it is not so, that the invader has broken the resistance of our people, even if in fact he were occupying and administering effectively the territory of our empire, as is not the case. Even in those circumstances, the proposal submitted to the Council should be set aside without hesitation. Did not the world hail as one of the most important marks of progress in international law, and as the most effective contribution to the reorganization of peace between nations, the principle proclaimed a few years ago by the United States of America, namely the refusal to grant jurisdictional recognition to the results of aggression. As sovereign of the Ethiopian people, I recall this principle, for it is our duty to defend the political independence of the Ethiopian people, the territorial integrity of Ethiopia, and at the same time the life, the property, and liberty of each of those individuals and each of those religious and civic institutions that make up the Ethiopian people. Unhappily, it is true that our people can now expect from states members of the League no material support. May I at least ask that the rights of our people should continue to be recognized, and that pending the moment of our divine justice, Ethiopia may remain among you as a living image of the violated right. Do not say that the Ethiopian people will derive no advantage from that, and that the only result will be a disturbance of international relations. The greatest disturbance that may be caused in relations between people is the confirmation and consecration of a violated right and of law, homage paid to the aggressor, the sacrifice of a victim. Millions of men and women throughout the world are today anxiously following the deliberations of the League of Nations. They know that this is the tragic hour, that the destiny of the League is to be determined. Being responsible for ensuring respect for the principles of international justice, is the League of Nations about to end its own existence by tearing up with its own hands the covenant that constitutes its sole reason for existence? The magnificent edifice that has just been reared for the triumph of peace through law is thus henceforth to become an altar of the cult of force, a marketplace in which the independence of peoples becomes the subject of trafficking, a tomb where international morality is to be buried. The fact is that war is continuing. International law in time of war grants the belligerent who occupy a certain point in foreign territory certain temporal, provisional, and limited powers. Our government has the right to maintain, as the military and civil authorities of the occupying powers, certain temporary, provisional, limited relations concerned with the defense of the interests of our national residents in the occupied territories. International law prohibits the belligerent from making any annexation, and it prohibits any power that is foreign to the conflict from recognizing the occupant as legal sovereign. Thus, the de facto situation does strengthen and supplement the provisions of the covenant and of the Pact of Paris that in its most categorical way prohibit de jure recognition of annexation, which would be recognizing the conquest of territory by force. Ethiopia protests against all subtleties of procedure, the object of which would be to evade the rules of competence clearly written in the covenant. As a delegate of Portugal said, nothing can be more repugnant and more hypocritical than the strangling of a nation by procedure. Will the League of Nations agree to do such things? This covenant forbids. I formally ask, as I am entitled to do, that the Council should refer this question to the Assembly of the League, before whom it is in fact already laid, and I ask, as is my right, that the Assembly of the League should proceed to this examination. The distinguished representative of Great Britain has just put the question very clearly. He said there are at present two ideals in conflict: the ideal of devotion to a lofty aim, and the ideal of ensuring peace as a practical measure. Dear asserted that it is often difficult to reconcile what is ideally just with what is possible in practice. He asserted that it is the essential mission of the League to maintain peace. Yes, the League has at its essential object the maintenance of peace. Yet there are different ways to maintain peace. There is the maintenance of peace through right, and there is peace at any price. Ethiopia firmly believes that the League of Nations has no freedom of choice in this matter. It would be committing suicide if, after having been created to maintain peace through right, if it were to abandon that principle and adopt instead the principle of peace at any price, even the price of the immolation of a state member at the feet of the aggressor.